It was a night I will never forget. My mother, as usual, sent me out on an errand, this time to grab some chips from the corner store. Nothing extraordinary, right? But little did I know that this night would be etched into my mind forever. The air was heavy, the kind of stillness that feels like it's watching you. As I made my way down the dimly lit street, I noticed a red car rolling slowly down the road. My heart instinctively quickened as it came to a stop next to a house. But not just any house. This house, it wasn't normal, at least not to me. Even as a kid, I'd always felt a strange, inexplicable unease whenever I passed it. It loomed in front of me now, casting long, eerie shadows under the faint streetlights. The memories of being 6 years old, and feeling that same gnawing fear surged back into my mind. The place had always given me chills, like something sinister lurked just beneath its ordinary facade. Tonight, though, the dread hit differently. It was sharper, more real. The sight of that red car, sitting eerily still in front of it, amplified my discomfort. I froze momentarily, every instinct telling me to turn back. But my mother's words echoed in my head, and I forced myself to keep moving. My pace quickened until I broke into a full sprint. The store wasn't far, just a couple of blocks. I figured once I got there, the safety of its lights and people would chase away the unease. But as I arrived, my heart sank. The store was closed. Of course it was. Just my luck. Now I had to go back the same way I came, past that house and that car. Turning around, I hesitated. I took a deep breath, steeling myself. As I retraced my steps, I noticed the red car again. It hadn't moved. It just sat there like a predator waiting for its moment. I glanced at it briefly, just for a split second. But something about it seemed off. The windows were tinted so darkly that I couldn't see inside. And then, as I continued walking, I felt it. That undeniable sensation of being watched. A shiver ran down my spine. Then it started driving. Slowly. Quietly. My blood turned to ice. I told myself not to look, but curiosity and fear got the better of me. I stole another glance. And that's when I saw it, or rather, didn't see it. There was no one in the driver's seat. Nobody. The car moved as if possessed, gliding down the road with an unnatural grace. My legs moved on their own. I ran, faster than I'd ever run before, my chest heaving as adrenaline surged through my veins. By the time I reached home, I slammed the door behind me and locked it, my breath coming in ragged gasps. My mother looked at me, puzzled, asking why I didn't have the chips. I couldn't find the words to explain. Even now, just thinking about it makes my skin crawl. That car, that house, they weren't normal. And for reasons I still can't explain, I know that night wasn't a coincidence. Something dark was watching me. I'm sure of it. After that night, I tried to push the memory of the red car and the ominous house to the back of my mind. But it wasn't that easy. It's funny how fear has a way of settling into the crevices of your thoughts, growing like weeds in a neglected garden. Days passed, then weeks, and yet the feeling of being watched never truly left me. Every time I passed that house, my heart would race, my palms would sweat, and my breath would catch. The house itself didn't change. It was still the same two-story structure with peeling paint and overgrown bushes, its windows perpetually shrouded in darkness. But now, the mere sight of it was enough to make me cross to the other side of the street. I never saw the red car again, but that didn't bring me any comfort. If anything, its absence was more unsettling. It felt like the calm before the storm. One night, as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, I heard it. A faint rumble, distant but unmistakable. My pulse quickened as I recognized the sound, an engine idling. I tried to tell myself it was just some neighbor's car, but deep down, I knew better. I crept to my window, pulling the curtain aside just enough to peek out. My heart nearly stopped. There it was, the red car, parked across the street. Its headlights were off, but I could see the faint glow of its dashboard. It felt like it was waiting, like it knew I was watching. I pulled the curtain shut and backed away, my mind racing. Should I tell my mom? Call the police? But what would I even say? Hi, there's a creepy car outside my house, and I think it might be haunted? Yeah, that would go over well. I decided to do nothing, hoping it would just go away. But it didn't. The car came back the next night, and the night after that. Always parked in the same spot, always silent, always watching. I started sleeping with the lights on, not that it helped much. The fear was relentless, gnawing at me, making it impossible to focus on anything else. Then, one night, I made a mistake. I couldn't take it anymore. My fear turned to anger, and I decided to confront whatever or whoever was behind this. Armed with nothing but a flashlight and a surge of adrenaline, I slipped out the front door and into the cool night air. The street was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that makes your skin crawl. The car was there, just as it had been every night. My hands trembled as I approached it, the flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. "Who's in there?" I demanded, my voice shaking. "What do you want?" No response. I took another step closer, shining the light into the car's interior. The windows were as dark as ever, but something moved inside. It was subtle, just a flicker of motion, but it was enough to send me stumbling back. The air around me felt heavier, colder. My instincts screamed at me to run, but I was frozen, rooted to the spot by a mix of fear and morbid curiosity. Then, the car's headlights flickered on, blinding me. I shielded my eyes, my heart pounding like a drum. When I looked again, the car was gone. Not driving away, not turning a corner. Just gone. The street was empty, as if it had never been there in the first place. I stumbled back inside, locking the door behind me and collapsing onto the couch. My mom found me there the next morning, curled up and shaking. I told her everything. To my surprise, she didn't dismiss me or tell me I was imagining things. Instead, she grew quiet, her face pale. "I think we need to talk," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. And that's when she told me something that changed everything. Apparently years ago, before I was born, a family had lived in that house. A father, a mother, and their young daughter. One night, the father had driven off in a red car after an argument, and he never came back. A few days later, the mother and daughter disappeared too. The house had been empty ever since. Some people said the family just moved away, but others believed something much darker had happened. My mom had always dismissed the rumors, but now, she wasn't so sure. "Maybe you should stay away from that house," she said, her eyes filled with worry. "Just to be safe." I nodded, but deep down, I knew it wouldn't be that simple. Whatever was happening, it wasn't just about the house. It was about me. And I had a feeling it wasn't over yet. The days that followed were suffocating. Even though the red car didn't reappear immediately, I could feel its presence looming over me like a shadow I couldn't shake. It was as if the house, the car, and whatever force they harbored had sunk its claws into my life, slowly pulling me deeper into their sinister grasp. Sleep was fleeting, and my mind became a restless storm of questions without answers. It wasn't long before the dreams started, or were they nightmares? Each one was vivid and grotesque, pulling me into a dark, surreal version of that house. In those dreams, I would stand in front of it, unable to move, as the door creaked open on its own. Shadows danced behind the windows, and a faint, distorted voice would call my name from inside. The worst part? I would always wake up with the feeling that someone, or something, had been in my room, watching me while I slept. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, bathing the streets in an orange glow, I decided I couldn't take it anymore. This thing, whatever it was, wasn't going to leave me alone. If I wanted my life back, I had to confront it. I had to go to that house. I told my mom I was going to a friend's place to work on a school project. She seemed relieved that I was trying to get back to normal, unaware of the real reason I was leaving. Armed with nothing but my phone and a flashlight, I set off toward the house. Each step felt heavier than the last, my heart pounding louder with every passing second. The street was eerily quiet, as if the world itself was holding its breath. When I reached the house, the first thing I noticed was how still it was. The air around it felt different, thicker, and the faint hum of crickets seemed to die out as I approached. The house stood there, bathed in the faint light of the street lamp, its windows like empty, unblinking eyes staring right at me. I swallowed hard, gripping the flashlight like it was some kind of talisman. "All right," I muttered under my breath, trying to summon courage I didn't feel. "Let's get this over with." The gate creaked loudly as I pushed it open, the sound cutting through the silence like a scream. I made my way up the overgrown path to the front door, every step echoing in my ears. When I reached the door, I hesitated. Up close, the house felt even more alive, as if it were breathing, waiting for me to make my move. My hand trembled as I reached for the doorknob. To my surprise, it wasn't locked. The door swung open with a low groan, revealing a dark, musty interior. The air inside was colder than it should have been, and it carried the faint smell of decay and something metallic. I stepped inside, my flashlight casting long, flickering shadows on the walls. The house was eerily empty, but it felt far from abandoned. Every creak of the floorboards beneath my feet sent shivers down my spine. The walls were covered in peeling wallpaper, and the furniture, what little there was draped in thick layers of dust. But it wasn't the sight of the house that unsettled me the most. It was the oppressive feeling of being watched, the sensation that I was not alone. As I ventured further inside, I began to hear faint whispers. At first I thought it was just my imagination, but the whispers grew louder, more distinct. They were coming from upstairs. My heart felt like it was going to explode as I climbed the staircase, each step groaning under my weight. When I reached the top, the whispers stopped. The hallway was dark, the only light coming from my trembling flashlight. There were 3 doors, one slightly ajar, the others closed. The open door seemed to beckon me, drawing me in like a moth to a flame. I stepped inside the room, and my flashlight illuminated something that made my blood run cold. On the far wall, scrawled in what looked like dried blood, were the words, "We've been waiting for you." The door slammed shut behind me, and the whispers returned, louder and more menacing. Panic surged through me as I tried to open the door, but it wouldn't budge. The temperature in the room plummeted, and I could see my breath in the faint light of my flashlight. Then I heard it. The unmistakable rumble of an engine. My flashlight flickered, and for a brief moment, I saw the red car outside the window, its headlights glaring like the eyes of a predator. And then everything went dark. I woke up to find myself lying on the cold, hard floor of that room. My flashlight was shattered beside me, its bulb a useless, cracked fragment. The room was pitch black, and the oppressive silence pressed down on me like a suffocating weight. My hands trembled as I groped around, trying to find some sense of direction. Then, out of the darkness, came the sound of footsteps. Slow, deliberate, and impossibly heavy, they echoed through the room. My breath hitched as I froze, every instinct screaming at me to run, but my legs wouldn't obey. The footsteps grew closer, and then they stopped. I felt the weight of something standing over me, though I couldn't see a thing. A voice, low and guttural, spoke from the shadows. "You were warned." It sounded like a chorus of voices layered on top of each other, each one dripping with malice. "You didn't listen." Before I could respond, the air around me grew impossibly cold, and I felt something brush against my shoulder. It wasn't solid, but it wasn't air either. It was like being touched by smoke, a chilling, spectral caress that made my skin crawl. "What do you want from me?" I managed to choke out, my voice barely audible over the pounding of my heart. The voice didn't answer. Instead, the whispers returned, louder this time, circling me like a storm. They weren't words I could understand, but their meaning was clear. I didn't belong here, and I wasn't going to leave unscathed. The whispers grew into a deafening roar, and then, all at once, they stopped. The silence that followed was even more terrifying. And then the door creaked open. A sliver of light from the hallway spilled into the room, revealing nothing. The words on the wall were gone, the blood replaced by the same peeling wallpaper that adorned the rest of the house. Summoning every ounce of courage I had left, I scrambled to my feet and bolted out of the room. The hallway stretched on longer than it should have, the doors on either side multiplying, their frames twisting and contorting as I ran. The house felt alive, its walls breathing, its floorboards groaning under my weight. When I finally reached the staircase, I didn't hesitate. I took the steps 2 at a time, nearly tripping in my desperation to get out. The front door was in sight, its frame glowing faintly like a beacon in the dark. But just as I reached for the doorknob, it slammed shut on its own, the sound reverberating through the house. "You can't leave," the voice whispered, right next to my ear. I spun around, but there was nothing there. Panic surged through me, and I did the only thing I could think of. I ran to the nearest window and threw my weight against it. The glass shattered, and I tumbled onto the overgrown lawn, scraping my hands and knees on the shards. I didn't stop to catch my breath. I didn't even look back. I just ran. When I finally reached my house, I collapsed onto the porch, my lungs burning and my legs shaking. My mom flung the door open, her face a mask of terror. "What happened?" she demanded, pulling me inside. I tried to explain, but the words wouldn't come. All I could do was sob, the weight of the experience crashing down on me like a tidal wave. My mom didn't press me for details. She just held me, her own fear evident in the way her hands trembled as she stroked my hair. That night I didn't sleep. I couldn't. Every creak of the house, every rustle of the wind outside, sent my heart racing. I kept expecting to hear the rumble of that engine, to see those headlights piercing through the darkness. But the red car never came back. In the weeks that followed, my mom decided we needed a fresh start. She packed up our lives, and we moved to a new town far away from that cursed street. I didn't argue. I didn't even say goodbye to anyone. I just wanted to forget. But forgetting wasn't as easy as I'd hoped. Even now, years later, the memory of that night lingers. Sometimes I dream of that house, its doors and windows waiting to swallow me whole. Sometimes I hear whispers in the dark, faint but unmistakable. And sometimes, when I'm driving at night, I catch a glimpse of a red car in my rearview mirror, its headlights off, its silhouette hauntingly familiar. I tell myself it's just my imagination, that the past can't hurt me anymore. But deep down, I know the truth. Whatever was in that house, whatever was tied to that car, it's not finished with me. And one day, it's going to come back.